Welcome to Mental, a podcast about destigmatizing mental illness and having big feelings. I'm Tessa Stacy, and I'm here to create a community of feelers, thinkers, and the slightly dysfunctional. Let's take this journey of growth and self-acceptance together. Hello, and welcome back to Mental, and happy Monday. I hope you're having a wonderful start to your week so far, and I'm really glad you're spending your day with me. Today, we're exploring a topic that's absolutely essential for protecting your mental and emotional well-being, and one that has been a game changer for me. Creating boundaries, and not just creating boundaries, but actually upholding those boundaries. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by someone else's emotions, or found yourself giving more of your energy than you had to spare? Regardless of what some might try to argue, setting boundaries is not selfish. It's an act of self-preservation or self-respect, and shows that you care not only for yourself, but for your relationships. In this episode, we'll talk about what emotional boundaries are, why they're so important, and how to start establishing them in your personal or even your professional life. So by the end of this episode, I hope you'll feel more confident to speak up about what you need without feeling awkward, and how setting boundaries can help you live in a way that feels true to who you really are and fuck everybody else. But before we dive, let's do a mental health check-in. All right, so there's been a lot going on. At the point of recording this episode, I have just launched the Mental Podcast. The first episode is out, and the support I've gotten has been wonderful. I've gotten messages from people that I just never would have expected to reach out and say anything. So that has been overwhelming in the best kind of way. And then there are other people who you hope would, say something, but haven't. I went into this having zero expectations, because I know that when it comes to mental health, mental illness, and talking about these things, that not everybody wants to talk about it. So I didn't have, big expectations, or I wasn't really expecting people to congratulate me or anything. But the people that have, thank you. It feels amazing. It feels really good. It's made me feel a bit reaffirmed in my decision to do this. Especially when it's people that you weren't expecting to say anything. I don't know. It's different than like my husband, for example. Like if he were to say something really encouraging, it's almost kind of a given, because he is my husband and he knows how hard I've been working on this. But to hear something so supportive and encouraging from other people who are not as close to you or tight-knit, for them to take the time to reach out and say nice things, that has felt really good. So I'm feeling pretty happy these days. On the flip side, of course, there's like everyday life and stress. And I am very nearly 20 weeks pregnant, and this pregnancy has been a bit difficult even now. I'm having a hard time recording this because I get so out of breath already, but there have just been some medical issues in the pregnancy that have been extremely stressful. I'm now seeing a high-risk doctor to hopefully get more answers and affirmations that everything's going to be okay. Luckily, baby boy is wonderful. He is growing at the perfect rate. He is healthy. I can feel him kick and move around now, which eases my nerves a bit. But gone through 4 miscarriages, it's difficult to have problems and not just wait for the other shoe to drop. Like, I'm constantly waiting for something bad to happen, and I just can't help it. I'm not going to say it shouldn't be like that, because frankly, I can't help it. I've lost 4 babies. Luckily, I had 2 healthy ones after that, but it is still really hard, especially the situation that I'm going through. It is very triggering for what I've been through in the past. So that is something that I'm currently dealing with and will probably have to keep dealing with throughout the rest of this pregnancy. Hopefully it resolves, but it's not looking likely. So thoughts and prayers if you want, if you're comfortable. Thoughts and prayers for the pregnancy and the baby would be so appreciated. But if you are an expecting mama and you're listening to this and you have any issues, feel free to reach out to me. Not that I can give medical advice, but I can be a shoulder, I can be a listening ear, and I know exactly what it feels like to go through something really scary. This is baby number 4, and this is probably the most scared I've ever been during pregnancy. So I get it. But I am feeling hopeful, and I'm feeling good, and I'm just ready for this baby to be here. But let's grab a coffee. Let's sit down, relax, and get to the core of today's episode. To be perfectly transparent, setting boundaries, listening to what my body and my mind need, and holding true to that has changed my life. And I'm not just saying that for the sake of this episode, like, I'm being for real. This hasn't been an overnight change, and it's not been this like huge magical transformation. It's been a slow burn. It's been small steps forward, big steps back, and discovering more and more about my needs every single day. I've entered what I like to call, what TikTok likes to call, my soft girl era. I'm just craving a soft, slow-paced life. I've officially thrown out the boss babe, do it all energy and welcome peace and quiet. I don't mean my day-to-day life with the kids, because it's impossible to have peace and quiet with a preteen and 2 toddlers and another baby on the way. It's actually quite the opposite. But what I mean is, I've been so attached to the idea that I need to be going 24/7 and providing for everyone else's needs that I stopped prioritizing myself. To be perfectly honest, I can't tell you the last time I prioritized myself, maybe other than when I was a teenager myself. The traumas of my childhood have pushed me to overcompensate in relationships, in my career. Since I can remember, I've felt like I need to say yes to everything. If a friend or a family member needs my help, if a new opportunity emerges, I want to say yes. And not because I want to necessarily, but because I feel obligated to. I would go out of my way for others to the point of disregarding my own mental state. In the past, there were no boundaries or moments when I would stop and ask myself, is this in my best interest? Will this cause me more stress than I can handle right now? Even if I knew I didn't have the time or energy, it's always been an immediate yes. And later, I would pay the price. At one point in my life, I was actively trying to have a baby, experiencing the miscarriages, attempting and eventually opening an online boutique, practicing real estate, running a photography business, in college part-time, And of course, being a wife and a mother and a sister and an aunt and a daughter, I poured into every single cup handed to me except my own. And I suffered. I needed healthy boundaries. So, what is a boundary? Really, I think we all have a general understanding of what a boundary is. Google tells us a boundary is a line that marks the limit of an area. Cool, but let's take it a step further. My favorite definition I've come across is from Nedra Glover Tawwab. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing. It's from her amazing book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace. This is a direct quote from her book, Chapter 1, page 5. Quote, boundaries are expectations and needs that help you feel safe and comfortable in your relationships. Expectations in relationships help you stay mentally and emotionally well. Learning when to say no and when to say yes is also an essential part of feeling comfortable when interacting with others. Unquote. In my experience while connecting with others and listening to their stories, I think the general population struggles with healthy boundaries. But I don't think that they realize that's the core of their problems. So what are some clear signs that someone is struggling with setting or maintaining boundaries? People-pleasing tendencies. I think that's probably the biggest sign or the most obvious one. So consistently prioritizing others' needs over your own, often at your own expense. Another is difficulty saying no and feeling guilty or anxious when declining those requests, leading to overcommitment on a regular basis. Emotional exhaustion, so experiencing like actual physical fatigue from managing others' emotions or just from a lack of personal time. Fear of conflict, avoiding disagreements to keep the peace, even when it compromises your own values. Nedra Glover Tawwab also talks about how avoidance, like wanting to disappear or ignoring and cutting people off because you don't want to deal with them, is a sign of a need for boundaries. This one was a big eye-opener for me, and we can talk more about that later. And one that I think that people probably don't realize, and they probably contribute it to something else, is codependent relationships. So relying heavily on others for validation and self-worth. We have to remember that we're all human and we all have different needs, values, expectations. In order to protect and maintain our relationships and ourselves, we have to be very clear and upfront about what is important to us. This topic alone can go in a few different directions. It's such a big one. Here's an example, and I'm almost a little embarrassed. No, I'm fully embarrassed to bring this up and have a lot of people that I do and don't know this much information about me. But it's real life, so here we are. This is just a small example of a boundary, but it makes the point. So, I have always had serious, gut GI issues. I don't know if it's IBS or a nervous stomach or an undiscovered allergy. I'm working on getting it figured out. But for several years, I've been the girl who's had to run straight to the bathroom after eating, and it's bad. I've been so insecure about this for so long, but it's something I had to put on the back burner and just kind of live with. When my husband and I started dating, he found this out very quickly about me. It couldn't be avoided, really. He and I, early on bonded over banter and picking on each other, sarcasm, just our warped sense of humor. Obviously, the issue of my poop problem has been, no pun intended, the butt of many jokes. As I said, I'm very insecure over this. It is extremely embarrassing, the situations I've been in over the years. Not only that, but it's also very physically debilitating at times. like spending hours going back and forth from my room or living room to the toilet. If I have a bad morning, then I feel like I can't go anywhere the rest of the day in fear of something happening. It's a whole thing, and it's been really hard for a long time. So at some point, I had to draw a line. I created this boundary. You can joke about anything you want. Pick on me for days about whatever, but not this. It's the one thing I can't stand to be joked about because it's caused me so much distress all my life. And if I'm being for real, it's not sexy. It's not hot. Yes, there are t-shirts and memes out there, hot girls with IBS or hot girls have IBS, whatever. But I do not feel like a sexy, empowered woman when my husband is joking about my shit. Literally. So, like I said, this is so small in comparison to other boundaries I've set with other people in my life. But I think that's the point I wanted to make also. No matter how big or small or stupid it may seem to someone else or even to yourself, a boundary is a boundary. It's created for a reason, to protect you, your health, your relationships, or whatever the situation may be. It may seem ridiculous to others, but if it's important enough for you to speak up about it just once, then you have the right to keep reinforcing that boundary. And it's not just for you, the person who's drawn the line. So back to my example, if my husband were to decide that he's going to keep pushing and making this joke, that would not only lead to my feelings being hurt, but eventually it would lead to a lot of resentment because he's not respecting my wishes. And also, I wouldn't trust him. If someone doesn't respect a small boundary I've set, this is a person I do not trust. Because if they don't respect the small things, how can I trust them and expect them to respect bigger boundaries, bigger issues? Like I said, no matter how big or small, a boundary is a boundary. And crossing these lines creates cracks in the foundation of trust. When those lines are breached, this is sending the message, hey, I don't really care about your feelings or your needs. I'm going to keep doing what I want. That growing resentment we feel when someone is continuously crossing the line will ruin a relationship. It can take a seemingly healthy relationship and create a very toxic environment. Whether it's a marriage, parent-child, siblings, friendship, or even professional with a coworker. Another way to look at creating boundaries is for preventing burnout. Whether you're juggling work responsibilities, personal relationships, or both, without clear boundaries, it's easy to fall into the trap of saying yes to everything, taking on extra tasks, staying late at work, or constantly being available for others and not yourself. This can lead to emotional and physical exhaustion, leaving you depleted and resentful. Boundaries act as guardrails that protect your time, your energy, and your mental health, helping you focus on what truly matters without overextending yourself. In your professional life, setting boundaries might look like defining your work hours and sticking to them, saying no to tasks outside of your capacity, or carving out breaks during the day. It's about recognizing your limits and communicating them clearly to colleagues or clients. In your personal life, boundaries can mean dedicating time for self-care, being honest about your emotional bandwidth, or setting limits on social interactions when you need downtime. By prioritizing your well-being and respecting your limits, you're not only preventing burnout, but also showing others how to respect your boundaries. Going back to Nedra Glover Tawwab, she states in her book, the root of self-care is setting boundaries. Let me repeat that because it's the best line I think I've ever read. The root of self-care is setting boundaries. Remember that. On social media, I see one perspective that we need to say no more. Saying no means protecting your peace. On the other hand, I see others saying we need to give more yeses and take on more of what makes us happy. There seems to be this fight about which is healthier, yes or no, more or less. Truthfully, there needs to be a healthy medium, a balance. I believe we need to be more intentional with both of our no's and yeses. If a job opportunity comes your way that would financially benefit your family, but would put you above your capacity for time and mental well-being, is it really worth saying yes to? Maybe your family would have more money to put towards vacation or gifting, but at what expense? I have always pushed myself to do more. Finish school, take on job opportunities, freelance, grow my business, grow myself. And though I want to achieve everything I can, I wind up spiraling because I can't keep up with it all. I look at my friends on social media and think, well, they're doing it all, so why can't I? Not taking into consideration that, one, social media is fake, and two, maybe I don't have the same bandwidth as others. Maybe I don't have as much help with childcare, or maybe they have a whole team that they can delegate tasks to. I just see what my mind wants me to see to justify the push for more and more. It took a lot of soul searching and self-reflection and frankly come to Jesus meetings to realize how badly I needed healthier boundaries in my life. Coming from a chaotic upbringing where these things weren't acknowledged or talked about, I had to learn from scratch what healthy boundaries are and how to start communicating my needs. The burnout was real. So the last big example I want to get into is technology. Setting boundaries with technology and social media is absolutely vital in today's world. We are always connected. Without limits, it's easy to let notifications, endless scrolling, or work emails take over your day, and it leaves you feeling distracted, overwhelmed, burned out, and don't get me started on the comparison game everyone plays when scrolling. By creating boundaries, you can take back control of your time and your mental space. For instance, setting specific times to check social media or turning off notifications during work or family time. That can help you stay present and focused. Unplugging during meals, before bed, on weekends, that can also help create space for connection with the people that matter and for rest. In addition to time limits, emotional boundaries with technology are just as important. For example, being intentional about the content you consume, unfollowing accounts that make you feel anxious or inadequate or drained. That can significantly impact your mental well-being. I've unfollowed so many people in the last few years, not just influencers, but people I may have added years ago when I first got social media who I had no emotional connection to. Sometimes I would just follow to follow because that's what people did when Facebook came about and Instagram, and it was the thing. You just followed as many people as you could so that you could get more followers. I didn't realize how it impacted my mental health until later on. I don't need to constantly see and compare myself to a complete stranger. So now if I come across someone who I feel like doesn't add value to my life, I have no qualms in following them. Setting boundaries about when and how you respond to messages, such as not feeling obligated to reply instantly, can also reduce stress. This is something I've been implementing recently. If it's not essential to my business or something important, it's not high on my priority list. I was just saying this actually to a friend of mine. I apologized for taking a few days to get back to her and explained how I'm trying to create that distance. And she was like, "You don't ever have to worry about that with me. I get it." And it just reaffirmed that I was making the right decision for myself and reminded me that the people who care about my mental well-being will be understanding of those boundaries. So back to the point. Remember that technology should work for you, not the other way around. I know it's hard to let go of devices. I get it. especially for people like me whose businesses are almost completely based on social media and staying online, staying connected, looking at what other people are doing. That's where I get 90% of my photography business. And I'm also a social media manager for a different company. It's important for me to have a presence there. It's my job. But what's more important are my mental and physical health and my family, who deserve my whole, undivided attention when it's not working hours. By no means am I perfect in this respect, but I'm actively working to have firm boundaries with my devices and my perspective of social media as a whole, because I've realized how necessary it is for me to be in a healthy mental space. Okay, so we've talked about what boundaries are, how to identify the need for them, and some aspects of life where boundaries are necessary, like relationships and technology. But how do we identify when someone else is not respecting them? So here's a few examples. You feel uncomfortable or resentful. Resent is a killer one. So a sudden wave of discomfort or being irritated, that can be a clue that your boundary is being pushed. They dismiss your no. So if someone keeps pushing, even after you've clearly defined your limit, they just ignore you. Or you feel drained after an interaction. You feel guilty or pressured. You're overwhelmed by the demands of others. They mock you, they belittle you, or you feel a loss of control. So if interactions leave you feeling powerless or like you have no say in your choices, that's a clear sign of a boundary issue. Obviously, when we care about a relationship, we care even more when a line is crossed and our feelings get hurt. I've heard it a million times, especially in regard to marriage. The reason why it upsets me 100 times more when my husband does something compared to my next door neighbor is because we have a higher level of expectations for those closest to us. This is why it's so important to communicate our needs and not let the situation keep escalating or let resentment grow. Let me repeat one line from Set Boundaries, Find Peace. Quote, "Expectations in relationships help you stay mentally and emotionally well." Unquote. Y'all, that is so important. I can't shout it loud enough. Expectations in relationships help you stay mentally and emotionally well. Boundaries in relationships are not just for the person setting the boundary, it's for everyone involved. Boundaries help relationships thrive. The first step to communicating boundaries is knowing what they are in the first place. That's a good first step. Think about your limits and your triggers. What situations or behaviors tend to leave you feeling overwhelmed or stressed or resentful or drained? For example, maybe you've noticed that being available for work calls after hours makes you feel like you never get to unwind. That's a clue that you need a boundary around your time. Now, take it a step further by clarifying your values and your priorities. What's most important to you? Is it spending uninterrupted time with family, maintaining a sense of autonomy, or protecting your mental health? Knowing your why will give you the confidence to set and enforce boundaries without second-guessing yourself. And use effective communication. Use I statements, as they're called, to express needs without blame. For example, I need some quiet time after work to recharge. This is actually something my husband has expressed to me over the years, especially since having kids. He needs time to decompress, and that's okay. He just had to communicate that boundary. Be clear and concise. Try statements like, when you blank, I feel blank. So you're communicating the reason for the boundary, but you're not leaving it up for discussion. Don't over-explain or apologize. There's no reason for you to apologize for having a boundary. I'm still learning this too, but seriously, don't ever apologize for setting or reinforcing a boundary, no matter how upset someone else gets. So here's a couple examples of boundary setting statements. I'm unavailable during weekends as it's my family time. I appreciate your input, but I'd like to make this decision on my own. You are not criticizing or putting blame on the other person. You're not telling them they've done anything wrong. You're just telling them what you need to feel comfortable. So stick to it. Stick to your boundaries. Here's a couple of myths about boundaries that I think a lot of people believe. Myth number 1, setting boundaries is selfish. No, it's not. Boundaries are about protecting your well-being so that you can show up as your best self in your relationships. It's not selfish, it's self-respect. Myth number 2, people will automatically respect your boundaries once you've set them. Unfortunately, no, that's not always the case. Some people might push back. Some people might ignore them or test them, like kids, for example. That's why it's important to not only communicate boundaries, but enforce them consistently. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but trust me, it gets easier with practice. So, how do we enforce our limitations kindly and effectively? First and foremost, be consistent. If you set a boundary and allow pushback even just once, that's saying to the other person that it's okay for them to not respect your boundaries and that they're allowed to do what they want. Just like with raising children, consistency is key. This is so important. I know it's really difficult, especially if you're someone who has the tendency to be passive and let things go really easily. But for the sake of your well-being, you can't let this shit go. This is how resentment builds, and this is how relationships fail. You have to stand your ground. Consequences are just one of the ways to enforce your boundary, but I would say it's highly effective. Sometimes repeating ourselves over and over and over is not enough. Unfortunately, it should be, but it's not. Let's say you have children and you take them to your parents' house to visit pretty often. You notice over time that your daughter doesn't always like physical affection and says no when grandma or grandpa try to give her a hug or a kiss, but the grandparents push it. They tell your daughter it's the right and respectful thing to do, but you disagree. As would I, by the way. You tell your parents, hey, I understand you want to hug and kiss the kids, but when they say no, please respect their wishes. The next visit, same thing happens. Grandparents aren't respecting your boundaries or your child's. You might repeat it. We don't force them to give affection if they don't want to. But next visit, same thing. They're pushing their limits. So you decide to reduce your visits. Or maybe you give them a healthy ultimatum and let them know a consequence going forward if they don't respect your limits. It's very likely that they'll be confused by this decision and will question your choices. So you tell them, I had this boundary, you kept crossing it. This is the consequence. What they decide to do with that information is up to them. We can't control how others will respond to our boundaries or consequences, but what we can control is whether it's important enough for us to keep enforcing it. Frankly, mine and my children's comfort is more important than anything else. Dealing with pushback is extremely difficult, especially when it's from someone that you love and you respect and you want to have a relationship with. When we aren't met with the same level of respect, it can lead to a lot of frustration, a lot of bitterness. When setting and enforcing boundaries, people may keep crossing the line you've drawn. They may ignore the situation altogether. They may ghost you, be angry, or try to argue with you. It's very easy to get into this mindset that by reinforcing our needs, we're nagging, being difficult, or not capable of compromising. I think this is one of the bigger issues in romantic relationships. People who don't respect others' needs will argue all of those things. That should be red flag number one. At the end of the day, you have to remember that you are the only one that is in control of your life. You are the one that has the responsibility of protecting your peace and your well-being. Creating boundaries is self-care. Start small if you need to, but start somewhere. Your time, energy, and mental health are worth protecting. Boundaries are essential for a healthy life. Not setting boundaries can lead to toxic relationships, burnout, resentment, bitterness, and can highly affect your physical and mental well-being. Setting and maintaining them not only takes practice, but it takes a lot of courage. Protecting your peace starts with respecting yourself. But we also have to remember how essential it is to communicate our boundaries and our needs. We can't expect others to read our minds, and we can't always expect them to take our boundaries seriously. It's our responsibility to consistently communicate and consistently reinforce our needs and wants. I challenge you to do some self-reflection this week. Think about the areas of your life where you may be experiencing burnout or frustration, or you're overwhelmed. Identify triggers you may have and practice setting a boundary. Start with small steps. I would also really encourage you to read Set Boundaries, Find Peace. It's an amazing read, very eye-opening, and I know everyone can take something away from it. I read it in a matter of 2 or 3 days. I was addicted. It's so, so good. Thank you for making it to the end. I appreciate you sticking with me and would love your feedback. Follow the Instagram page at mental_the podcast and leave us a comment on our latest post. Share your experiences with setting boundaries or share something that resonated with you on today's episode. Ask a question, share what you'd like to hear in a future episode, or just say hi. I would love for you to be a part of the mental community. Remember, you are worthy, you are loved, and you should stay another day.